Welcome, everybody. Welcome back. Everybody have a seat. We'll get started. Exciting panel. We've had what a great discussion that last one is. For our next panel, we're taking a deeper look at the education to workforce pipeline, which all of our panelists are deeply involved in different ways, but as you will find out, some ways are interconnected. We want to explore what we're learning in workforce training and technology to help us prepare students for success. And of course, focus on what role governors and states can play is always our key. Looking forward to the discussion after this panel. And the panel will be moderated by Scott Pulsipher, the president of Western Governors University, established by Western governors, including one of my predecessors, Governor Roy Romer. In fact, I think we just celebrated your 25th anniversary a couple years ago. First, we're joined by Dr. Tequilla, right? Tequilla. Dr. Tequilla Brownie, serving as the CEO of the New Teacher Project with personalized consulting and community engagement. They partner with schools to deliver innovative solutions that help students access the factors that we know will help them thrive. Before she joined TNTP, she was with Memphis City Schools and oversaw their efforts to improve student outcomes by increasing teacher effectiveness. We're also joined by Dr. Stephen Moret. Dr. Stephen Moret is president and CEO of Strada Education Foundation, one of our partners whose mission is to help clear the path between education and work by fostering collaboration between institutions that serve learners and employers. He's worked in many public-private partnerships in higher education and workforce development, including Virginia Talent Accelerator, Virginia Tech Talent Investment, which doubles the number of degrees in computer science in Virginia. And finally, Shalinee Sharma. Did I get the right Shalinee? Shalinee. Shalinee Sharma, CEO and founder of Zearn. Zearn is a nonprofit educational organization beyond a math learning platform. And by the way, in Colorado, we're one of their cases where we've licensed it statewide, and it's having amazing, profound improvements in the classroom. And finally, our moderator, Scott Pulsipher, president of WGU, competency-based university founded by Western governors. I, as a Western governor, sit on their board and appreciate, although with your new conflict things, I don't know if I can. It's very complicated, all the paperwork you're making me do, but hopefully you can resolve that. But together, they're giving us a lot of ideas for ways to partner and move our state forward. I'm grateful for all the insights that they're sharing, and I'll turn it over to Scott Pulsipher.
Thank you, Governor. I can assure you that you will have none of those conflicts. And so, but we are certainly grateful for the initiative that you have. What is always remarkable to me, having been with WGU for 9 years almost now in April, is that so many of the solutions that our future needs, especially as we consider creating pathways to opportunity so that individuals can change their lives for the better, originate within the states. Like, one of the really cool things about being associated with WGU is that it was founded by governors, it was founded by states for states. We know that, in fact, so much of the access to education happens locally, so much of the opportunity pursued happens locally and regionally, and just seeing that on the kind of boots on the ground solving for the challenges that individuals are facing is incredible. We're grateful to have these individuals facilitate the conversation dialogue today. You can recognize here that with Tequilla and with Stephen, they have a kind of a branch all the way from K to gray, somewhat might say, so all the way from that educational traverse and that linking of that education to the economy. And also with Shalinee, you're bringing a very clear and distinct kind of role of how technology can increase the quality of education, can allow us to personalize it, can really meet individuals where they are to increase the quality of that education, the instruction, everything else like that. So we'll do our best to traverse that. And Tequilla, why don't we start with you? We certainly know. Oh, and we will allow, per schedule, I'll try to make sure that we have 15, 20 minutes at the end to facilitate a dialogue with the governors and others that are seated at the table. But why don't we start with you, Tequilla? And there is one of your recent reports actually outlines that there are 5 of these key factors that do shape a young person's ability to thrive in adulthood. Could you actually walk us through those 5 factors? What are some of the learnings that we can take away from that report?
Sure. Thank you so much, Scott, and thank you all for having me today. Two things on the outset I'd like to say why I'm really excited for this conversation. One is I think governors play a unique role in the ability to move ideas from simply ideas to action. And then the second thing, as governors, I know you know that you have to hold two things true at once. And so some of our tensions as a sector to look myopically, if any group, I think, is positioned to not do that, it's this group. And so in our research paths of opportunity, what we found and what we outlined was two facts that are just unassailable through the data. One is that education doesn't often look at Department of Labor data. And so we actually analyzed some long-standing Department of Labor data looking at outcomes for young people. So think of it as an extension of Raj Chetty's work. But what we did was look even further deeper into the K-12 experience. And what we found was that for young people all across the country coming from poverty, they had only about a 30% chance of experiencing a living wage by the age of 30. And to be clear, a living wage is the floor, not the ceiling. Now, our highest performing students academically only still had about a 58% chance of getting to a living wage. That means our best and brightest from poverty had the toss of a coin's chance of getting to a living wage by 30. Kids from more affluent and middle class families, the number wasn't that much higher, it was 61%. So that tells us that academics, did it increase the chances for kids from poverty? Absolutely. But it also showed us that academics in isolation is insufficient. And so we set about finding, instead of just measuring, I'm a researcher by training, but I'm also a practitioner, school social worker, district leader, you name it. We are about learning and doing. We sit at the intersection of research, policy, and practice. And so as we start to look at our own data, what we're hearing from literally the millions of students we serve, as we look at the research and the literature, 5 themes emerge for us, and we call these our 5 factors. Academics, unassailably. We know that literacy and numeracy are paramount to a young person's success, but again, the data show in isolation they are actually ineffective. And so the other things we found was things like social capital. I know there's more research around that now. Career-connected learning. We have a very specific framework around that, and we'll talk more later. The fourth one was around personalized supports. We leave it to chance that young people have a plan, have a path, and are on that plan. Now, what's interesting in higher ed has figured out with the advising model, the intrusive advising, that we don't leave it to chance for college students, but why on earth would we think that young people in our K-12 systems have the skills to navigate on their own? And the fifth factor is around civic and community engagement and democracy. All of the research on Gen Z and the coming generations is showing that they are very engaged and passionate about our democracy, but they're seeking purpose. And so a way to harness that, much like we heard from Randy and from Jeffrey, in using that to really spark their own agency and intrinsic motivation. Again, it serves them well and combines to position them for success, as well as our nation. The last thing I'll say, those factors do not work alone. Not in isolation. We're not proposing silver bullets. They are all absolutely inextricably linked with one another.
That's really insightful. And just trying to remind us too that you can't separate these things and expect to have incremental gains. You actually do have to have the integrated effects of them, is what actually happens. One of the things I'll just add to what Tequilla was sharing is that we've certainly discovered in our work at WGU is that if an individual doesn't have a sense of how they are going to contribute to the world, like our what we like to call it as vocational identity, they won't even attach a purpose to their education. Like it has to have something to connect as to how they see themselves contributing to the world. So I would connect some of that to the civic and community engagement. Shalinee, let's come to you. You certainly are known at Zearn especially for all of the advancements that you've done for math instruction, but your work is far more than just kind of teaching numbers, right? You're like, how do you think about, I guess, if you will, the investments that you're making and utilizing technology to establish those academic foundations, and how does it build on what Tequilla was sharing to establish like the likelihood of economic mobility or a self-determined progress, et cetera. Why the investment in that kind of instruction, education, and how you're seeing it connect to the economic mobility outcomes?
Well, thank you for that question, and thank you, everyone, for having me here today. And Scott, I won't take that as a slight against math, where you began that question. So
No.
I'm going to move through that, and because math is the best, and then answer your question.
You can certainly attach the math and the command
No,
of it to
yeah.
actually, yeah. So
I'm saying, yeah, even though, I'm going to move through that. So, I'd like to start by telling everyone a story that actually changed our nation and actually changed the whole world, but it's a story that's not often told. And it's a story where we have to remember what happens when governors and leaders decide to invest in education and academic foundations. So in 1890, it was really rare in the industrialized world to go to high school. And only 7% of American kids went to high school. And by 1940, that number was 73%, tenfold change. And at that time, that was a dramatic innovation. And what followed, according to Claudia Goldin, a Nobel Prize-winning economist, is the technological dominance and economic prosperity that we live in today. So in 1890, it was weird to go to high school. And what happened in those 50 years, between 1890 and 1940, where America led, everyone then followed. What did we do? Well, it was actually a bottoms-up movement that leaders attached themselves to, that educational innovators worked on. And what they did was something so simple. They looked at the test to go to high school, and they read the test and they said, wait a second, this is like not a test of any intrinsic ability. Actually, if you went to high school, you'd pass this test. So this is backward. Actually, let's put all our kids in high school, because then they'll pass the test. And what we did was we created a workforce, a citizenry, that then built this amazing country that we're a part of. And so we can't forget that when we invest in academic foundations, that's what follows. And if we look at the top performing countries in PISA, and we are not one of them, that's what they have done. So I just want to remind you of that story. And then I do want to echo what you hear governors talking about and what we know as educators, which is these are not two-year ideas. These are multi-decade investments that create transformations in our human capital. And what's fun and exciting about what we can do now is we can use technology to do that, to scale it, and to scale it cheaply, and to scale it equitably, especially when that technology is built with the systems so that it supports students from where they're coming from and where they're beginning. So that's what I would say in terms of academic
Just as a
foundations.
follow-up to that, would you say that in that kind of history lesson that you shared, does that effectively suggest that what we designed in the education started with the end in mind and it kind of worked backwards? Like, because they recognized that we needed these particular competencies or skills in the workforce. And when we saw individuals who were most proficient in them going through a certain path, we kind of worked them backwards to say, how do we create that pathway? I'm just curious as to your perspective on that. How did this come about?
Yeah, so it was actually a group of, so, the states that got going were like Nebraska and Massachusetts, and, it was actually a disparate set of states across the country that worked on what's called the high school movement. And there were different, families were involved. John Dewey, education innovators were involved. The business community was involved. But at the core, I think it comes from an American irreverence, right? So it was, well, this is how it's supposed to be. These are how the systems worked that we'd inherited, and then we became attached to them, but we didn't understand them or have deep assumptions. And when we looked at it, we said, okay, we actually want, for whatever sets of reasons, we want an educated workforce. In World War I, we wanted to be able to count bullets. We wanted our armed forces to be able to count bullets. Well, they couldn't count. So there were a bunch of different reasons for why we wanted a more educated workforce. And we said, we need more kids to go to high school, but they can't pass the test. And we looked at that test and we were like, this is backward. And so it was these kinds of ideas that flipped the system.
That's really helpful. I certainly, I don't want to share too much of a skewed lens that we coming from WGU may have, but it certainly seems like that was the basis for this idea of a competency-based approach to education. It says you still have to have proficiency established against skills that are needed in the workforce. And if the talent development pathway is not producing that, you got to rethink how you're doing the development of that talent. And that's, thank you for that. Okay, Stephen, for you, I think even connecting to what Shalinee was sharing, because there's even this element, if you look at the history of post-secondary education, the institutions were the ones who introduced the modern bachelor's degree, the ones that were relevant to the workforce needs, et cetera. But you, at Strada, you've done a lot of work tracking long-term impact of different post-secondary pathways, whether it's the college degree, whether it's career credentials, apprenticeships, or even I believe you study and have at least research military service, et cetera. What can you share with us about what the data is telling us about which of these paths lead to economic mobility, or maybe it's all of them, maybe it's a little bit of a story like Tequilla was saying, that's like, hey, no one thing in isolation does it. What would you share in terms of what the data is telling us about these?
Thank you, Scott. And let me first say it's a great privilege to be here, and I'm absolutely enamored with the comments of both Tequilla and Shalinee as well, and agree with them strongly, even though we haven't met before today. Let me also say, as a sort of a precursor to everything I'm going to say today, that at Strada, we deeply believe in the multiple valuable purposes of education. And while we're going to talk a lot about education today as a pathway to jobs, a pathway to opportunity, and that is one of the really valuable purposes, I just want to acknowledge up front that it's not the only one. If we think about this in the context of pathways to opportunity, I think one of the great things about America is that we support multiple pathways to opportunity. We, at least today, don't track people into a single one, and you can switch, back and forth. Many people even today are coming back as, Scott, they might get a bachelor's degree and realize, hey, I actually need a certificate to get a better job. So I think supporting those multiple pathways is really important. If we think about which pathways sort of most consistently lead to a good job, a good economic outcome, a good return on investment, you could make a pretty strong case that the number one is actually quality apprenticeships. No debt, paid while you're doing it, very high job placement rate and good jobs. Number two, maybe a close call between applied associate programs in community colleges and bachelor's degrees and above. Bachelor's degree certainly has the highest sort of average outcome and the highest ceiling of earnings as well, but it also has the lowest floor when you consider cost and you consider the underemployment problem that's out there. Associate of Arts degrees basically have a zero ROI. There may be a few exceptions out there, but other than those who transition to get a bachelor's degree or get some other kind of credential, those Associate of Arts degrees in the labor market are not doing well at all. And then the last path, which I think is probably the most interesting and the least understood, is the fastest growing part of post-secondary education and workforce development. That's the non-degree credential space. It is a black hole today in terms of understanding outcomes. What data is out there is mostly self-reported from surveys that had maybe a 5 to 10% response rate that was not representative of the total. And so if you look at this picture altogether, we do have a diversity of pathways that lead to opportunity, but the reliability with which they do, the range of employment outcomes, and especially the amount of information that is available to people to make really well-informed choices is really quite variable.
I think it's fair to say at least in post-secondary, it is a little bit of a Freakonomics problem. Like the consumer of education, if you will, is often not the payer of it, nor are they the only beneficiary of it, et cetera. And so it's hard to actually get all those working effectively. But maybe just to all three of you, I'd love to have you kind of weigh in on this particular point, though. Do you believe actually there's a clear expectation or a shared definition of what a good outcome is? And so we talk about economic mobility, we talk about, economic livelihood or self-reliance or something like that. Do we all know that we're striving to enable the same thing for somebody? I'm just curious if you feel like there is a shared definition around that. Go ahead.
Oh, I love this question, and the answer is absolutely not. I mean, one thing I'll say, even when we talk about academics, there's actually varying definitions of what we even mean by academics. And it came up some this morning when we were talking about sort of what needs to be true for young people, what we have or have not delivered over the past 40 years of the existence of our Department of Education and of all of us working on the ground. And so, I mean, I have certainly long argued that we do need to reconceptualize what it means to actually educate our students, and that has to be driven by what we define as student success. And so do I believe, and does TNTP believe that we need absolutely outcomes, data, metrics? Absolutely. We have, unfortunately, narrowed that to a narrow set of outcomes, largely around only standardized tests. Are they key? Are they important? Yes, but again, we know that that is one metric that's really important, and we have to measure, to your point, define what success is, and then map our way to that and hold ourselves accountable to that. The last thing I'll say, I've been really, it's been exciting to see all of the states and the governors sort of define the profile of a graduate, which I think is getting, to your point, a better picture of what we're defining as success for students. I, and along with my colleagues at TNTP, have been, watching to see, okay, what is the profile of a community that creates the profile of a graduate? And we haven't seen that, so we're actually working on that, because the conditions need to be true within the four walls of a school, but also all of the proximate things that need to be true for the experience that kids need to be successful.
Stephen or Shalinee?
So I'll jump in with before founding Zearn 12 years ago, I worked in the business world. I worked at Bain & Company for 12 years, and I worked for Fortune 50 CEOs. And what I would say is that we in K-12 or in higher ed and that is where I identify now, but we get lost in rubrics. And when I worked in the business world, it was simpler, which was nice. And it was just, as a company, am I going to put my my plant or my distribution center in this place? Can I find a workforce? Yes, no. And if no, then I will not. And I worked with companies making those decisions, and the quality of workforce and the belief that there was a workforce pipeline was a critical part of that decision. And so at the minimum, we should be thinking about these important benchmarks, which are when our students finish K-12 and or finish a CTE credit and or a college degree, are employers excited to hire them? And I can tell you, sadly, one of the reasons I left that world and came to K-12 was that employers were not happy with the quality of our students. And so is that like the bare minimum threshold, and should we, do I want more from my own 14-year-old twin boys than an employer's happy with them? Of course. But that threshold we have to be hitting. And I do think we need to be steering and focusing on that. Otherwise, I worry that we get lost with our very scarce resources against too many objectives. And I don't think top-performing countries are spreading out their scarce resources. I think they are focusing on a core set of things in K-12 and through certification and through degrees.
I would add, Scott, in thinking about outcomes and ROI, I do think to some extent it's in the eye of the beholder. People are going to define that a little bit differently. At Strada, we think one good way of thinking about that is if you sort of think about a high school diploma or an equivalent as kind of the minimum baseline credential that someone should have in the United States to participate in the labor market. If someone's going to pursue additional education or workforce program, something on top of that, is the amount of money that they have to spend or borrow, can they make that back with the earnings boost that they get within some reasonable period of time? We've looked at it, for example, in a 10-year period. So if you look in the U.S. today, for the most recent cohort of bachelor's and associate degree graduates in the U.S., roughly 72% of them within 10 years got to break even or better, right? Which is good, but that also means 28% did not. Even after 10 years, they did not earn enough more than they would have earned with only a high school diploma to be able to pay back the cost of that credential. And trying to get more people, trying to position more people to have good outcomes is a big part of our focus at Strada.
That's really helpful. I think one of the things that's highlighted across this, and I particularly, Shalinee, I like how you position it, which is like, can I find a workforce? So one of the things about the notion of a pathway that I would add to what you've already shared is that you have to see the individual as the primary beneficiary of the pathway. It's like, it has to accrue value to them. If it doesn't, it's not going to move anything. Second, you do also have to see the workforce or the employers, et cetera, as a beneficiary, because if the individual isn't readied with the skills that are needed for the job, then the employers are not meeting their skills gaps or their demand for volume of talent they need, et cetera. And it seems like we have had this growing trend, but there's a growing divide between the skills of the individuals coming through some of these pathways and what's needed in the workforce. You highlight this, Stephen, the notion of applied education in some way is what you captured with apprenticeships or work-based experience or applied degrees, because it's applied in the sense that the skills you're going to get are going to be relevant to the work that you're going to be doing. And the employer doesn't have to invest in additional training on top of a credential you came through the pathway for. So let me,
Can I
yeah,
insert-
please.
Can I insert one point to connect that came up this morning with Randy and Jeffrey? I mean, Randy talked about it as, in more engagement. I'm going to use the term specifically motivation. I say that as a psychology major, undergrad. But when we think about the lack of engagement and attendance of our students, we think about the dissatisfaction generally, right, with the adults, with parents and communities, with our entire education system. And so they're not motivated to, engage and push their children on that. I think what you're hitting on is an opportunity, which is if we actually did a better job of connecting and embedding when we think about career-connected learning, and broadly, right, not narrowly, just sort of CTE skills, though those are important. I mean a broader definition of CCL, then you get that instructional coherence. Time is finite. Our young people aren't attending school 5 days a week, 8 hours a day now. So to think that we're going to add an 8th period of workforce or of career-connected learning is a fallacy. So you have to think about how we're creating instructional coherence and embedding that into our programming, which means some things have to change. I want to acknowledge that. The career optionality, I love, Stephen, what you said, that there is no one pathway. We have to make sure that we're actually creating more pathways for young people. I did a TEDx talk recently. I said, if college is the answer, what's the question? I'm kind of tired of this false binary question of college or no. It's actually, that's the wrong question. It's the wrong entry point. The true question is, how do we ensure that young people have, frankly, multiple options and multiple pathways? And so that optionality can't start in high school. We can't think that they're going to magically wake up on their 16th birthday ready to engage in apprenticeships, and they're reading at a second grade level. And then the last one is around workforce readiness. To your point, the durable skills, both the technical academic skills, but also the durable skills that they need, that are those applied skills that you referenced.
That's really helpful. Actually, last week, I think it was, the Wall Street Journal even did a report about KIPP schools and how, in fact, while they were founded on the very basis of college-going graduates, high school graduates, right, they've significantly expanded that kind of perspective as to what are the pathways you're going to go to and how does this the secondary education lead to one of those. And they're looking at it differently. Let's change our perspective a little bit here, and I'll start with you, Shalinee. Certainly in Zearn's world and WGU's world, the same thing. It's like you've seen firsthand how technology can increase the quality of not only designing the pathways, but increasing the personalization of instruction, everything else like that. What have you learned that you would share about technology's role in scaling effective instruction and what works or what doesn't? Let's start with that.
Thank you. I love that question. So I'd say, technology is neither good nor bad. It's just a force multiplier of whatever the human intent is behind it. So, there's no such thing, all movies are not good. Some are terrible. Some are great. It's just the quality of the, director and the writer who put that together. And so it is unfortunate that, in fact, a great deal of technology in education force multiplies the mediocrity of our system. And so instead, what you have to do when you're doing something like working in technology, you have to understand, for Zearn, we serve 1 in 4 elementary school kids in the country. So, every day, millions of kids are completing billions of problems. That means the quality of that instruction needs to be the best. And so what we do at Zearn is we go and look at best practices around this country and around the world. I've gotten to visit the best math classrooms in this country and on multiple continents. And what you see are a few things that you have to put into the instruction. In mathematics, and this is going to be true, is going to be discipline specific. But in mathematics, it's about a balance of fluency and conceptual understanding. And every day, we're balancing those things. The second is we teach math with pictures, because pictures make math make sense. So you may not understand what is a 1/3, what is 1/4, but if I take, pizza and I give you a third of it, or I give you a quarter of it, you know which one is bigger. And so we're bringing those types of known pedagogy into the system. I think the most important thing, though, that technology can do is something that our systems don't do today. You don't see them in the best classrooms, but you see them in the best countries, which are catch-up systems. So the way that K-12, particularly in math, works today is if you fall behind, you are behind. That's how our system works. It has no catch-up. That's too bad. We shouldn't actually just decide that if any one of the children in America fell behind, that they should just be behind. We don't want to live in that country. We want every one of those kids to catch back up, be successful, contribute to our prosperity, contribute to our country. And so we need to give every kid more chances. And I would posit that everyone sitting around this table got a lot of chances. I did. And it's because we got those extra chances that we were able to be successful. And so technology has to be a catch-up system. So it has to meet a child, 2 grade levels behind in math, no big deal. We're talking about that like that's some big thing. That's everybody. At any point in time, every one of you fell behind in math. Big deal. Maybe not Governor Polis, but everyone else. And so I'm just joking with you, but everyone should get a chance to catch up, and that is something exciting and new that technology can offer.
That's actually really encouraging. I don't know if any of you have seen this recent research report that came out, Carnegie Mellon. I think Kettinger was the lead kind of author of it, but there were 4 researchers on it. But that surfaced this astonishing regularity in learning.
Yeah.
And it basically, so it highlighted what in fact is the case, is that all of us actually need, I think it was 7 tasks to basically master a particular skill or particular concept, et cetera. You need those 7 things. Such that learning outcomes, as we currently measure them, are mostly indicative of where you started. They're not indicative of one learns better than the other and one can master a concept better than someone else. It's actually mostly a function of where you started, such that if you fall behind early, you have a compounding problem, because nothing in the process from what grade you're starting in to where you're then in the next grade, it's nothing later is actually helping an individual catch up. How do you do the same number of tasks on a subject in a shorter amount of time period when technology can enable you to do that? So this is very encouraging. Go ahead, it looks like.
Yeah, and I just think it's really important, if sometimes when we talk about education problems in K-12 or in post-secondary and we're just insiders, I think we depress everybody else. and we just have to, and when we do, that's really dangerous because people give up on us.
Yeah.
And we are the future. Like, we are literally creating the future of this country, and so we can't have people give up on us.
Yeah.
And so the reason I say that kids can catch up is because they can. And it's not such a big deal, but it requires a few more bats.
Yeah.
To that point, I actually thank you, Shalinee, for double clicking there. I wanted to point out similarly the conversation earlier today around innovation and pilots and why we don't scale innovation or replicate. One of the things that we did in our own research was look at the school, at the unit of analysis of the school. Are there schools that have a consistent history of helping kids catch up in our nation? And so we looked at years of our data set in our country, and we found a handful of schools in our nation who do have at least 10 years history of helping kids catch up. Because again, as Jeffrey said this morning, and I've heard Tom Kane is a good friend of mine say, if COVID was the earthquake, we are in the midst of the tsunami. And so if we don't treat it as such, then I think to Shalinee's point and act like it is business as usual, that so many kids are behind, we'll never achieve these desired outcomes about education and workforce. And so in our research opportunity makers, we mapped what are the things that those schools are doing in their instructional pedagogy and their culture. 3 themes came up: consistency, coherence, and belonging. And so those schools are creating the environment that they combine the technical pieces that Shalinee is mentioning around the access of high-quality instruction around with the cultural and the moves of the adults and the teachers in the building as well. Those are the types of things that we should be learning from and replicating, and hopefully not all starting from scratch, where every governor on their own is trying to say, oh, who's helping kids catch up? Let me find them, let me do it. This is the beauty of our nation, and sharing these best practices and codifying those.
What were those 3 again? Consistency,
Consistency, coherence, and
coherence,
belonging.
and belonging.
There's this fallacy that teaching is a magic, that number one, it's only a calling, it is a career. We can train teachers to be more effective. Though I do appreciate that teachers feel like they're called. I hope brain surgeons also feel like they're called, right, to do that. But acting like we can't develop and make our actual professionals be better is a fallacy. And then the second one, the belonging, that one is really key because it hits on students actually feel known in their school. They feel like an adult knows them, they know what they want, and they're helping to connect the dots for them, their experience with their desired outcomes. And so that is the climate and the culture that's fostered in that school, and the kids can tell you about the experience they have, and you're seeing them then not only catch up and get back on grade level, but then go on to be successful.
Stephen, maybe trying to synthesize some of these comments that were actually just provided, but and also connecting with something that you well know, which is that College for All movement used to exist, but now we also have AI as a new enabling technology that can certainly amplify a force multiplier of either mediocrity or excellence, depending on how you utilize it. But it's also changing the shape of work. What would you offer in terms of, like, given the nature of the work and skills needed, back to even Shalinee's questions, like, can I find the talent that is needed for what we need to do? And they see their jobs changing, and that could be accelerating. The goal for those individuals now coming through the pathways could be accelerating at a pace that the pathways aren't keeping up to. And College for All movement was out there, but maybe those pathways, you're studying and researching these pathways. What would be kind of some of your, prognostications or recommendations, et cetera, to say, hey, in this new AI-enabled world, what do you think of these pathways that individuals are pursuing? How do we think about designing them differently, being more personalized in it? Like, what would you offer in that kind of forward-looking view?
Sure. Great question, Scott.
You have 20 minutes. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
AI, like some of the other big sort of general purpose technologies of the past, I think is going to be an extremely important sort of development in how our economy grows. I think overall it's going to create a tremendous amount of opportunity and obviously some level of disruption as well. Our education and workforce systems in the United States today are not really well positioned to respond to the economy we already have, let alone the one that is coming to life with AI. I want to give you just a couple examples of what I'm talking about. I mentioned earlier with respect to bachelor's degrees and college degrees that they have both the highest ceiling and the lowest floor. We have all these discussions as if everyone has the same outcome. Like, here's X% earnings premium for a bachelor's degree, when really it's massively positive to massively negative, depending on the particular circumstances, degree field, geography, et cetera. We have not built the education employment systems in states to enable states to really help everyone involved to make well-informed choices. I just want to highlight a couple really specific examples of that. First of all, interestingly, we talk about employer alignment. This is, I think, an important opportunity, particularly for those that want to have good employment outcomes. There's really not a state in America today that could tell you what the supply-demand gap for talent is for their programs in any region of the state with any level of accuracy. And a big reason for that is that while we do track earnings outcomes, we don't actually track occupational outcomes. You don't actually know what job someone has. So for example, if an English graduates get lots of good jobs, but some of them are also underemployed. If you look at the median earnings of an English grad from a particular university, what you're really looking at is like that middle point, right? There's some people that get extraordinary jobs as management consultants with, Bain or someone like that. There are others who are literally working in frontline retail or, as a waiter or a waitress, which tends to be a very sticky situation. So we need to understand occupational outcomes. That becomes even more important with the developments of AI, where the occupational mix and the nature of occupations is changing. So there's a way to solve that. It's called enhanced wage records. It's the fastest growing development in states. There's almost 20 states today that are going to be working to implement this over the next few years, and we're helping them. Another example is in this non-degree credential space. This is the fastest growing part of post-secondary education, and it's a total black hole in terms of earnings outcomes. If you go on the college scorecard today, you can go to just about any college university in America, and for any degree program, you can see what the typical earnings are several years out. If you try to find that kind of information for just about any certificate or non-degree program, there's no credible source of data out there. And so even as we're trying to encourage folks to look at a whole range of pathways, we're not giving them the information with which to do that. So those are two good examples of things that states can work on to both be responsive to what's happening in AI, but also just to make the overall system work better, to help people make better informed choices, and enable more people to have pathways to opportunity.
That's an awesome final point, because that reality is that neither, if we don't have the economic and the job outcomes and the data about that, neither the individual nor a state or a federal government knows actually how to allocate the resources to increase access, to increase completion, to increase attainment rates, et cetera. In our just last 2 minutes before we turn it to a broader question and answer that can come from the governors or and others seated at the table, what would be the one thing that you would offer as like one big shift you would like to see, whether it's in policy or public-private partnerships, et cetera, to really accelerate the innovation that needs to happen to increase the alignment between education and those, that academic foundation to a vibrant workforce and economy? We'll go from end towards me. Shalinee, you can start.
Sure. I spoke of it earlier, but so I would start with math matters, numeracy really matters. When you look at the most predictive kinds of behaviors, K-12 for getting into college, getting through college, lifetime earnings, irrespective of the variance in outcomes, math is part of that. And our current math teaching and learning system is built to select for like the few math geniuses, which might have made sense a century ago, but isn't what we see the best performing countries in mathematics, and their economies are in great shape because of it. They decided that, just like the high school revolution, where we looked at the test and we were like, wait, we can make all our kids pass this test. They did the same thing. So they looked at their population and they said, wait, we can make all these kids math kids if we teach them. And so that's what we need to do. To do that, we have to give kids more than one chance, which means we have to build catch-up systems in the school building with communities, and that's what is happening in the highest performing countries in mathematics.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. I first just want to endorse Shalinee's point, because one of the most reliable predictors of underemployment is the extent to which someone's undergraduate curriculum had a meaningful amount of math intensity. For folks that really go out of their way not to take a single math class, the chances of being underemployed are actually much higher, whether or not they're working in a math-related job.
You can put that quote on your website.
Yeah, it's in one of our reports called Talent Disrupted. But if I were to pick one thing, if you think about the Let's Get Ready initiative, which we love, if you look at the 3 pillars, the one thing that all states need to have that almost none of them do to bring this to life is a robust education to employment data system. Now, just about every state has connected their education records to the employment data that they have, but every state has meaningful opportunities for improvement. So I would actually suggest for those states that want to both enable equitable pathways to opportunity for individuals, but also better meet the talent needs of employers, implementing those best practices for their education and employment data systems is one of the most impactful things that they could do. And we've actually created something called the State Opportunity Index. If you Google Strada State Opportunity Index, we've actually looked in depth at all 50 states and shown how well each state has done that today and what the gaps are to go from where they are today to having that system in place.
That's wonderful. Tequilla?
Sure. I would say, building on that, I think twofold. One, one of our main problems of practice is connecting the innovation that is happening, but actually gathering the data around what's working to then scale. And so that connection of practice and research, and by research I actually mean applied or evaluative research, in order to know what's working and then to scale that. But that actually takes intentionality, both in planning and in implementation. And so I would push for every state that has articulated their profile of a graduate to, alongside that, structure, yes, absolutely, the data systems that are needed, but alongside that, articulating, here are the innovations and here's our mapping of understanding what works in order to then scale and replicate the community that creates the profile of that graduate.
That's wonderful. Governors, we'll turn it back to you. I don't know if you want to go in a particular order, Governor Polis.
Well, on that last point, I think there's a lot of how do we measure results? As you said, how do we tie it into workforce? We have, some very vague things, are people employed or not? For a long time in higher ed, they used, or they still do, repayment of student loans as a proxy for other things. What would be your advice about, sort of taking those first steps towards how we can better get the data piece going with employment, wages, not the fully finished model that none of us will achieve, but what are some of those steps we can take or proxies we can use?
Sure. And Governor Polis, I'll say there's actually a remarkable amount of alignment of folks that have looked at this problem about what the key elements actually are. And those are reflected in that State Opportunity Index that I referenced. It wasn't something Strada just came up with on its own. We consulted with folks across the country. One very simple step that states can take, and I'm so sorry I didn't look up your individual states before I came today, there's something called the Post-Secondary Employment Outcomes Coalition, the PSEO Coalition. There are roughly 40 states, I believe, that are participating in this now. And while it's largely focused on how states sort of share data across state lines, so you can better understand, Colorado's a great example where a lot of your workforce actually came from other places, right? Particularly your college grads. It's initially based on that. We are actually funding, as are other funders through the PSEO Coalition, technical assistance for states that want to make these improvements. If I had to pick really three things, I would say. One, it's making sure that you are actually tracking the data that you need in the unemployment insurance wage records, including title or occupation, so you can actually see what kinds of jobs people get. The second thing is tracking non-degree credential outcomes. Using your existing UI. This is the beauty of it, right? Like, as an employer, Strada has a few hundred employees. We already have this data in our ADP system, right? Most employers are already tracking this data. It's just a matter of reporting it along with the rest of their UI data, and we've got a whole system we can share with you on that, or set of suggestions. Second is tracking outcomes for non-degree credentials, which almost no states are doing today. And third, and this is critical, you can't just collect the data. You need to have a dedicated team of people to analyze this, to really build expertise in it, not only to understand what the data is saying, but to engage directly with real employers to get a qualitative perspective as well. If you do those three things, by the way, would put any state in the #1 position today. No state has nailed all three just yet.
Great, let's go to our fellow governors.
And
Somebody else want to weigh?
well, the only thing I would add to that is absolutely the piece is actually backing up time. So thinking about the leading indicators that actually connect to those lagging indicators. Because again, if we only look after there's UI data, that means the kids are adults and working, instead of understanding what were the prerequisites for them actually getting to those UI outcomes. And so I'm talking about the leading indicators. Right now, again, we've only been measuring third grade reading, just to use that as an example. What are the other metrics that we need to be measuring along the way to know that you're on the right track? Otherwise, you'll be surprised that, oh, you're 30 and you're not, at a living wage.
Governor Murphy.
Less questions and a couple of observations. First of all, this is a subject area with a lot of big words. I'm trying to digest all the titles and words. I just want to get that off my chest with all due with all due respect to math. Tequilla and I have crossed paths over the years, and I'm a huge fan. And I want to have a statement to you and then one to your colleagues. I would have thought that one of the great benefits of the U.S. Department of Education would be some of what you've been talking about, where we could all learn from each other in as seamless a fashion as possible. So I don't know what this configuration ultimately looks like, but I hope that asset is preserved somehow, somewhere, because it seems to me it's low-hanging fruit, as they say. To you two, what fascinating careers to have had before your current endeavors, whether it's being a Bain consultant for over a decade or running a couple of economic development authorities. I mean, you're almost uniquely positioned to address this promising practices across the workforce and education continuum. I think that's really powerful, which leads me, again, these are observations, less questions, Jared. We spent a lot of time on our Economic Development Authority trying to figure out where to jumpstart apprenticeship, workforce development programs, and in what sectors. And I think this is probably unique to each state. You have to, we always say, wake up in the morning, look in the mirror, and be honest with yourself about who you are, who you're not, what you can be, what you can't be. And I say that only to make the observation, it's the bridges that we don't build, which I think are as important as the ones we do build. So when you look in the mirror in New Jersey, I'd like to think we could make cars and trucks again. That's not going to happen. The manufacturing, I'll probably die trying, but I think I'll die. The manufacturing that's much more in our wheelhouse is sophisticated pharmaceuticals, fuel cells for solar energy, things that are value added, very much STEM focused. And so I just make that observation. You run the risk, if you're not careful and selective, that you could be banging your head against the wall on a bridge that frankly is an unnatural bridge for you and a much more natural one for a Colorado or a Rhode Island. So I just wanted to make those observations. Deep thanks, deep respect for all three of you. And Scott, by the way, who I'm a big fan of. And Western Governors, quick, I'm not a member. It's the coolest non-national governors subset. It's the only one that really has an identity, and the university's a great outcropping of that.
You know, Governor Murphy, even within a state, especially larger states, but I would even include Colorado, it's about different industries and mixes in different areas. I mean, we have different markets in our state. You probably do.
I
Southern
think
New
you've got
Jersey,
it more than
New
we
Jersey.
do because
Yeah.
you're a lot bigger
Yeah.
geographically than we
Certainly
are.
the big states, Texas,
Yep.
California,
No
Florida,
question,
New York. yeah.
Florida, et cetera.
Governor, if I may, thank you for recognizing the work, and it's good to see you. One thing that two things maybe I'll say. One, before coming into education, I worked in actually workforce development after welfare reform. So though this is a totally different population, that's what drove me to education, right? Seeing the abysmal results that we were having as a nation and having former welfare recipients get off and stay off welfare and experience employment retention and advancement. There are some lessons learned, though, even though that was, 30, 40 years ago, I'm aging myself, right? There are still some lessons learned from that time that we actually should dust off and look at here as we're designing systems. Similar problem, different population. The second thing I'll say, from a policy perspective, we're seeing as our organization is on the ground across 41 states, lots of states are using incentives to attract businesses and industry, but then I see some states, state leadership is leaving it to chance at the local level, that the mayors have the resources and skills to maximize those new industry partnerships. So an example, I happen to live in Arkansas where U.S. Steel just bought, Big River. It's all in the news. Everyone's talking about it. A real world example on the ground. My team went in. Those leaders, post-secondary, the industry leaders at U.S. Steel, the superintendents, the mayors, the Economic Development Council, they had never all sat at the table together. ever. And so we realized that the community college had stood up some welding programs that weren't even the type of programs that the industries that were coming needed. The high school had never revisited their high school academic programming to actually maximize and help get kids ready for six-figure jobs in rural Arkansas that didn't require it. And so I just want to emphasize this coherence and the opportunity to work with your mayors to maximize as these industries are coming and getting great tax breaks, but to again work with your communities to maximize the ROI.
It's a great point. It's a great point.
Governor Murphy, I just wanted to add briefly, in my work leading economic development in Louisiana and Virginia, I had the opportunity to participate in literally a few thousand site selection decisions of companies. And one of the things that I found during that time was that talent really became the dominant driver. I mean, taxes matter, incentives matter, site preparation matters, but talent, if there's ever a silver bullet in economic development, it's talent. And that really, those conversations that I had with so many of those companies and so many of those site selection consultants really motivated a lot of the work that I do today. The other big motivation was that what I was hearing from the companies was so different from what the higher education story was, not in any sort of intentional way, but they just weren't talking the same language, and finding ways to help them understand each other better, we think will be great for everybody.
It's a great point. I meant to ask Shalinee a question. Was there a moment at Bain when you said, the hell with this, I'm going to go co-found Zearn?
Yeah, there was.
Can you give us 30 seconds on what that moment was?
So it was actually, it wasn't Jeff Canada schools, but it was so my basic job for the year was to offshore six-figure jobs that were, jobs for college students in America. That's what I did for a year. And I listened to that. And simultaneously, I had just so happened to go see an amazing charter school in New York City. It's not Jeff Canada schools, but ones that he likes. And I was watching opportunity being made. And just, it was the dissonance of that. And just the desire to think about how can we, I love technology. That was my background. And so just this idea that technology could be a force multiplier for good. So I don't know, it just all came together.
Let me go to Governor McKee before, just for.
Yeah, I don't know whether I can add very much. It's a wonderful panel and learning a lot, in particular shaping it. I look at everything from my state's point of view, obviously, so we're catching up, with you, Shalinee, with the Math Matters. We certainly, we announced that several months ago. Looking forward to have you in Rhode Island shortly. But on the affordability of the college, I think Rhode Island is doing pretty well. I mean, we have a college promise on our community college that Governor Raimondo started, and I made it permanent. And then working with Jack Warner at Rhode Island College, who Melody knows over there, is we put in a Hope Scholarship. So if kids that are finishing their freshman sophomore year, but they're on 2.5, graduating to 4 years, they get their senior and junior year covered with their tuition. So we're in the process going to make that permanent. But one of the areas that, and in trying to connect our higher ed with our K through 12, I've already mentioned Commissioner Infante Green, and we have Shannon Gilkey, who Stephen mentioned, is probably, I'm very fortunate to have a couple people that really are driving the issue. But when we're trying to connect in this idea of certificates or 2-year or 4-year, we are trying to track the income as results from that. And I really believe in the dashboards. We got one on attendance matters. We can track the attendance. I got one on, I can do the litter. I can track what we're picking up in litter every day. I can do what we're doing on municipal road improvements, and on a dashboard. We haven't figured out the dashboard in this Road to Prosperity that Shannon is heading up with our DLT director and Jeremy, who's here with us today in my office. We haven't figured out the dashboard of tracking all the work that we're doing, which we believe is going to get results, but we have not figured out that. So I've asked this dashboard, if I lose 10 jobs in the context of all the state of Rhode Island, I plug that in, did we raise incomes or did we lower incomes? We haven't figured that one out yet, so maybe you could throw in, I don't know whether this enhanced wage tracker has anything to do with what I'm trying to find out, but really, really seeking out a way to take the work we're doing on apprenticeship programs, pre-apprenticeship programs, to reconnect with taking people that have started their degrees and helping them finish their degrees by paying for their car repairs or their rent or the utility bill. So we're doing a great deal, but we have no way to measure this outcome. So I'll throw that up to you and give me some advice to figure out how to figure that out.
Governor
Final
McKee,
remarks, just in 1 minute or two, then we need to roll into the next one. But does anybody want to respond to that?
I just want to agree that Rhode Island definitely has one of the best higher education coordinating boards in the country. We already have a great relationship with Shannon, as you know, and we'd be delighted to help you with that.
Okay, we have to roll right into our next panel. Let's give our panelists a round of applause.